Welcome to Garden Wise Adventures. My name is Malie, and today we're going to do a fun video. Now, I live in Utah Zone 6/7, and when I say 6/7, there are years where our winters hit temperatures that are cold enough for Zone 6, but recently, in the last 6 years or so, we've been more trending towards the Zone 7 type winters. Now, I don't feel comfortable enough to plant Zone 7 plants without protection here. But if you look at our hardiness zone map, then it says we're Zone 7. Now, I lived in Utah in my junior and senior year in high school in the early 80s when it was really, really cold. I moved away. Then I moved back here in 2007, and I've been here since 2007. And when I first moved here, I planted a fig tree. Now, before I lived here, I lived in Southern California, and we had the most wonderful fig tree in our yard. It was a yellow fig, it tasted like honey, and even though it produced hundreds of fruits, they never, ever made it inside our house. And my kids and I loved figs. And when I moved here, I found out that you could plant hardy figs, Chicago hardy figs. Let me go show you that fig tree that I planted. Now, up here on my hillside that actually needs mulch, I did not put, as a side note, I did not put the weed mat here. This weed mat was here when I moved in. But I had this hill, and I had a desire for a fig tree. And I think this was 2008 or 9. I planted the Chicago hardy fig. Now, up here on this hillside, we've got a lot of juniper. It doesn't get a ton of water. I've never fertilized it. It's mostly rock. I have to use a pickaxe to dig any holes here at all. And this fig tree has responded in like kind. And it's also never gotten covered over the winter. So every year, this fig tree dies to the ground, and it comes back up from the roots, gets about a foot tall and sits there, and it has never fruited. Now, last year, our winter was actually warm enough that it did not freeze to the ground for the first time ever. And look what we have on this fig tree. For the first time since 2008 or 9, we're actually going to get figs on it. And it's about double the size it normally is. Now, I left that fig tree because it was a survivor and for the nostalgia of actually having a fig tree on my property. But I had kind of assumed that I would never be able to harvest figs here in Utah. But once I started my Utah Rare Fruit Growers page, I started to realize that there are people that are growing figs here in Utah and they're harvesting them. So, when I built my food forest that you see behind me, I decided to start planting figs. We are up to 8 varieties, and I want to go through them and talk a little bit about figs with you. Now, I have several different videos on figs. You can Google search Garden Wise Adventures figs and see the different videos that I've put up. But let's show you what they look like this year and talk a little bit about Breba figs and tell you what they are and whether or not you can get a crop of Breba figs here in Utah. Now, we're here on the south side of my property, and we're going to hear air conditioning sounds. I'm sorry about that. It's just really, really hot this year, and this is my neighbor's air conditioning. But this is the second fig tree I ever planted. This is a Chicago hardy. It was planted about 5 years ago, and it is an extremely productive tree. Right now, it's about, I'd say, 7 to 8 feet tall. And let me see if we can get in here. We've got a lot of new growth where the figs aren't, but you can kind of see how productive this fig tree is. But you do kind of need to get in there and see it. So we do have a ton of figs on this. Down here, we actually have a black mission fig that decided not to produce any figs this year. This is only its second year in ground. And what I found, it takes typically 3 years or so before the fig trees really settle in here in Utah and do well. Now, I cover my fig trees every winter for the express purpose of getting a Breba crop. And I'm going to go show you what a Breba crop looks like in just a minute. But I also want to talk a little bit more before we leave this spot about the schedule that I've kind of settled into. Now, you can see how large this fig tree is. I know it's kind of hard to tell on a video how large it is, but it gets really quite big. And I do need to cover it every winter if I'm going to get a Breba crop. And I used to prune it just before I would cover it. And I cover mine in mid-September. The reason I cover them in mid-September is, probably 60% of the time we can get a hard freeze anywhere between mid-September and the beginning of October. And that freeze can go down to 20 degrees or below. Then it'll just pop right back up and act like nothing ever happened. But if we hit a freeze that deep with the leaves still on the fig tree, that's going to kill it to the ground right at that point. And then we lose all chance of a Breba crop. We have to start over and let it grow back from the ground the next year. Now, if it grows back from the ground next year, you will get figs, but depending on the length of the season the following year, you may or may not have time for most of those figs to ripen. So I really want to cover my fig trees to lengthen out the season of production. But to do that, I have to cut my fig trees back quite heavily. And like I said, I tried to do that just before I covered them, but the trees didn't recover as well. I have resorted now to pruning my figs between mid and the end of August. That gives them time to heal their wounds, it gives them time to settle back in, and they don't put out as much growth after that. You can see all the new growth. I mean, there's probably been 1.5 feet to 2 feet, maybe even 3 feet in some areas since June. So, but that growth won't be happening after I prune them back. I'll thin them out so they can breathe, and I'll prune back the height so they can fit under the covering, and then leave them until it's time to cover them. So you can see what the main crop of figs look like. So the main crop of figs appear on new wood. So way down here at the bottom, you can see the brown wood, and there's no figs down below on the brown wood. But if you come up a little bit further, this wood is still a little bit green. This is the very first flush of new growth this spring. And we've got figs on that growth. See right there's the figs. And then on the newest growth, this is the newest flush of growth that's bright green, you can see more figs starting to come. So this is extremely highly productive, but you can kind of see how the growth works. Let's go show you a fig that is a Breba fig. Now this is probably a brown turkey. This is a cutting that a friend gave me. She said her grandparents had been growing it on their property in Salt Lake for years and years and years, possibly even dozens of years. And they'd never covered it. It would always come back in fruit. Now this is its 4th year in ground, and I've always covered it. So I think what I'm going to do is probably take a cutting of it, and then this winter leave it fully uncovered and see what happens. Now I can pretty much guarantee that it's going to die to the ground if we have a normal winter. And once it dies to the ground, it will grow back from the roots. But what we're going to see is how many figs are produced and if it actually has time to ripen them. But this is an extremely productive. This is even more productive than my Chicago Hardy. The figs are very tasty. They're brown. We've even got brand new baby figs on the newest growth. It hasn't been in ground as long as my Chicago Hardy, so we're not getting as much growth, but we're getting a huge amount of fig production. Now this plant did have a Breba crop on it. There was about 2 or 3 figs that were on there, and we had a giant windstorm and it blew all of those figs off. So we're not getting a Breba crop on this one, but we are getting a Breba crop on this 2-year-old baby Latarula Italian honey fig. Now let's show you what the Breba crop looks like and how we know whether or not it's a Breba crop. If we look down here, you can see that this is the hardwood from last year. You can see where the cut was when I pruned them back. And we've got a fig below that. Now you can tell these are ripe because it's hanging on the neck. This is the neck. It's hanging down and it's very, very soft. Let's pull it off. Now, even though I thought it was 100% ripe, well, it might be okay. If you get the milky sap, yep, we're getting the milky sap off of it. So it's a little bit too early. Darn it. I'm still working to figure out when, but it's extremely soft. It was hanging down really low, and this is a Breba fig. Now, like I said, this is a 2-year-old plant. We had a lot of the Breba crop, and we're getting a few of the main crop on it. So because I can never handle waiting to eat something like this, let's open it up and look at it. This to me looks like a very ripe, very beautiful fig. Let's taste it and see what it tastes like. I'm so sorry you're not here. This is the taste of fig that I remember when my kids and I lived in Southern California, that we just couldn't wait for every summer. It has the same crunch with the seeds. It's got the same sweet honey taste. It's like heaven on earth. That was so good. I can't wait for more figs to start to ripen. Now, a little bit more about the Breba crop. As I said, it's produced on old wood. And you know you've got a Breba crop if you start seeing figs as soon as you start seeing growth in the spring. Now, my Chicago Hardy fig had produced Breba crops in the past, but I didn't really understand how to grow figs in Utah that well. And I knew fig trees were drought hardy, and if you don't water them, they look fine. But what was happening is I wasn't watering the fig trees enough, and the Breba crops are drying up on the tree. Now that I've learned that I need to water them heavily at least once a week, the Breba crops are starting to actually ripen. So let's go look at one other tree that has a Breba crop and talk about it, and then we'll show you the rest of the varieties that I have. Now this little guy is a 3-year-old Negron, and last year was the first year that it really heavily produced, and the fruit was absolutely delicious. It was very dark, and it had kind of a berry flavor. And then down here, let me see if I can do this one-handed, we've got our Breba crops, and we have one right here. It is not quite ripe yet, but this is the color they get when they start to ripen, and you can see it hanging. It's starting to get soft. We're going to give it a few more days before we harvest it. We've got another one right here that's changing color, and then we've got all of the main crops starting to form. So this isn't producing as heavily as the other trees, but we are getting a good production. So this is a Negron, and some people say Negron is either identical to or possibly actually is a Violette de Bordeaux. So this is a great little tree. It's going to get pruned pretty heavily so that we can protect it again over the winter. This one right here smashed in between my pomegranate tree, which is actually forming fruit this year. This is a 3-year-old pomegranate down there. Maybe you can see this. Let me get down here. Yeah, this is a 3-year-old pomegranate, and the first year that it's forming fruit. But smashed in between there and my yarrow that needs to be cut back, we actually have a Marseilles Black VS. Now, this is only a 2-year-old tree, so we don't have a lot of production, but we've got a couple of fruit on here. There's one there, and then there's a few more there, and I'm really excited to try these out. These are main crop fruits, even though it looks like it's on brown wood. That's new growth this year, and I'm really excited to try it. Now, one thing that I've learned with figs also here in Utah is we have a short growing season and not a long amount of time to ripen. And if you want to get figs to produce, you need to go through and pinch your figs. So I go through in June. I'm not going to do it now because it's not time anymore to prune them. But you go through in these little growth points. So this is a growth point, and you just pinch that off right there at the base. You do that in early June through mid-June, and that helps force side shoots. So you can see how many side shoots there are on this branch, and that helps force figs. Now this is another one. And I purchased it. When I purchased it, it was supposed to be a Ronde Bordeaux. The fruit looks like Ronde Bordeaux is supposed to look. The leaves look like Ronde Bordeaux is supposed to look. And, you know, I've never tasted a Ronde Bordeaux, but reading the descriptions, the fruit tastes like it's supposed to taste. But Ronde Bordeaux is supposed to be the earliest ripening fig out there. And this is my latest ripening fig. You can see the new little figs right there, how tiny they are. We have a few over here. That are a little larger. And this is a 4-year-old fig, and it is just not a big producer. And the figs that it does produce are very late. It is a dark fig. You know, they're rounder than the Negron. They turn the same color, the same dark color, and they have the same dark berry flavor. But I'm just, you know, I don't know what I'm going to do with this fig tree. There's, you know, like I said, it's producing a few on this side. We've got a few figs. But this side, Well, there's a few down there. This side seems to be almost completely bare of figs. So it's not a heavy producer, it's a late producer. Usually by the end of the year we have a ton of figs unripened on the tree, so it may have its days numbered and I may try another variety here. We'll see. We'll give it one more year to see if it improves its game. Down here is also another brand new 2-year-old little bush. You can see where I pinched it right there. We've got the side shoots. We've got a new little fig right here. This is an Olympian fig. Olympian figs are supposed to have kind of peach overtones. So we've got a few figs on it that I'm really excited about. There's more over here. So I'm really excited for a 2-year-old fig to have these producing. So if you actually want to have figs, and if you want early figs in Utah, fig trees do take a little bit of work. You need to cover them, protect them over the winter. You need to make sure that they're watered enough. They don't take a ton of fertilizer. I fertilize them once in the spring. But other than that, they are really easy to grow here. Now, if you end up happening on the right variety and the right conditions, you can get figs and not have to cover them. Now, you won't get the Breba figs if it freezes to the ground, but you will get some figs that ripen. And I would love to hear the varieties of figs that you're growing in Utah, and if you're growing them in ground or in pots. If you decide to grow figs in pots, that opens up your world to all sorts of different varieties. You don't have to grow just the hardy varieties, and you don't have to cover them. You just put them in a pot that you can put in and out of the garage during the times of year that it's freezing, store them in the garage when they're dormant, wheel them out in the spring, and then you can have your figs. So hopefully this video has been helpful for you. If it has been helpful, I hope you like, subscribe, share it with your friends, and go have a wonderful garden adventure.